Something very different and potentially very significant started quietly in a South Korean port on Saturday morning. A container ship set sail from Busan in South Korea bound for Europe. Nothing new in that. Obviously, it happens every day of the week. A ship goes to Europe as part of a massive global shipping industry that carries 90% of all goods globally. What's different is the route this one has very deliberately chosen to take. This one is going via the Arctic. The Pan-Star Acro's return journey should take about 45 days. That's significantly less than the traditional journey via the Suez Canal. South Korea will use the trip to measure fuel costs and journey times and test whether the Arctic can become a commercially viable trade route. Interest in alternatives has grown as the war in Iran and restrictions around the Strait of Hormuz have highlighted the vulnerability of major shipping routes through the Middle East. The Pan-Star Acro is sailing north towards the Bering Strait, the gateway to the Arctic. From there, it will follow the Northern Sea route west along Russia's Arctic coast before emerging into the Barents Sea and continuing on towards Europe. Its European stops include Felixstowe, England, the Dutch port city of Rotterdam and Gdansk on the Polish coast before it returns via the same route. That's opposed to the traditional route, the way ships currently run through the Indian Ocean, Red Sea and Suez Canal. The northern route cuts the distance and avoids increasingly insecure Middle Eastern shipping lanes. That's why it's on the table. That's why the route is in the GPS of the Korean ship, and that's why we're speaking to Michelle Wiese Bockmann, a senior maritime intelligence analyst at Windward maritime AI company. Michelle, good to see you. Are we talking about the Northern Sea route because disruption around Hormuz and the Middle East demands alternatives, or because the Arctic route itself has now become a realistic option whose time has come?
You know, I wouldn't call it a realistic option. I think that the Northern Sea route has geopolitical significance for China and for Russia, and also for Asian countries that are looking for an alternative should there be choke point issues. And of course, we have seen from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the Houthi threats in the Red Sea, and also very recently, the decision by the Panama Canal to cut transits because of water shortages in Gatun Lake, that you really do need to have some alternatives in place. But again, this is about establishing commercial viability. A lot of shipping companies have been doing this for the last 10 to 15 years. And I would argue that it's certainly for containerized shipping, which is what this ship is carrying, is containerized goods. I don't think that there's a very clear-cut case yet for commercial viability.
Yeah, I think that's interesting in and of itself about the Korean trial. Not that the Arctic replaces the Suez tomorrow, but that repeated disruption is making governments and shipping companies put value on routes they once regarded as uneconomic. The simple fact that this is being trialled is of interest, right?
Definitely. And in addition to South Korea doing this test shipment, you saw Chinese container shipping company Sea Legend launch a couple of weeks ago, with some delays, I might add, the first regular containerized shipping route to Europe from China. They're doing 7 shipments, I think, this summer over the 3-month period. But again, these are very small ships. So the South Korean ship is about just under 3,000 20-foot unit equivalents, like less than 3,000 containers. And the Ever Given, which was the container ship that everyone knows that got stuck in the Suez Canal,
yes,
that's 20,000. Containers. So you can see it's a very, very small size, and about 20 Ever Given size ships a week will sail from Asia to Europe. So just to put it in perspective, you know, these are small vessels for their class and very low volumes, which is why we're not really sure whether the distance and the fuel savings will offset icebreaker costs, and also whether or not the time saving is going to result in a freight premium that makes it viable.
Right, they're certainly not superstitious sending the Ever Given back into these waters. Take away the ice and the politics and the bad weather for us. A ship leaves Busan in mid-August and heads north. What does the Northern Sea route potentially offer that the traditional route through Suez doesn't?
Well, it offers time savings, and there's no guarantee, even in the summer, of an ice-free voyage. So it will potentially involve going through using Russian government-owned nuclear icebreakers. You'll be going through the Russian economic exclusion zone, Russian territorial waters, and because of those geopolitical touch points, a lot of the European container lines that have done tests in 2018, I think Maersk Line did a test, they have said that they're not going to continue these routes. They've cited environmental reasons, but certainly geopolitical concerns would also be front and centre of any decision to avoid the Northern Sea route.
If we put the ice then back into the equation, how narrow is the window in which ordinary commercial shipping can use this route?
Well, I would argue that ordinary commercial shipping probably couldn't use the route because you would need ice-strengthened hulls, and the vessels would have to have what we call ice class. Russia has certainly sent a lot of oil and gas carriers through that haven't been ice classed in the last couple of years. I would argue that that's environmentally reckless because of the sensitivity of the Arctic, the risk of an oil spill, either from the oil that's being carried or the fuel oil that the vessel is carrying. So there's quite a few concerns about using the Northern Sea route, besides just the fact that there's ice there.
And so I assume the concerns are carried by insurers who would need to sign off on these journeys before this route was taken routinely. Is that right?
Yes, marine insurers would need to sign off on this. And as you said, there's a very small window. It's less than 3 months, I think, by the mid-September, end of September. That's probably it in terms of the commercial viability of being able to send a vessel through. Of course, Russia, they're maritime experts in the Arctic. They have a lot of oil energy infrastructure there. They've got 2 liquefied natural gas projects. They also ship oil from Murmansk in Russian Arctic. So they have the expertise, and they've built the right vessels to allow broader and more wider shipping in that area almost year round.
How dependent is this route on Russia? Can you realistically sail this Northern Sea route without Russian cooperation fees or services like icebreaking?
No, you need a license in order to go through the Northern Sea route from Russia.
Russia is also under heavy sanctions for its war against Ukraine. Would these sanctions affect the ability to use this route? How much would Russia earn potentially for anyone trying to set out via this way?
I think that's probably the reason why European container lines and other commercial vessels and tankers are avoiding the route. And especially this summer, we're seeing Russia, they've sent an unprecedented convoy of 8 oil tankers through earlier this month. They're also sending a lot of their liquefied natural gas carriers through because for Russia and China, where there's increasing geopolitical cooperation in the Northern Sea route, this avoids Western touch points for them. So, for example, the European Navy have been boarding, interdicting shadow fleet vessels in Northwest Europe and in the Mediterranean. And so by going via the Northern Sea route to China, Russia is avoiding that issue. And also Ukraine attacked one of their LNG carriers in the Mediterranean in March. And so LNG carriers from their Arctic project have been sailing all the way down around the Cape of Good Hope, all the way to Asia to avoid the Mediterranean. And so now the summer offers Russian opportunity for their ice-classed LNG carriers to go via the Northern Sea route to China instead. So the beneficiaries of more commercial shipping in the Northern Sea route aren't so much Europe and other Asian countries. It's primarily most of the trade is between Russia and China.
And if the Arctic is becoming more navigable, what about the other route through the Canadian Arctic, the Northwest Passage? Does that come into play?
I don't think it comes into play. It's the Northern Sea route that is offering that direct route between Europe and Asia that saves about half of the sailing time if you look at going from, say, China, which is where most of the containerized trade is going, through to Asia.
Looking at more immediately the situation as we have it now, looking at the shipping data after months of disruption around Hormuz and the Red Sea, are companies still behaving as though this is a temporary problem, or are they starting to plan for a much longer period of instability as it currently stands, Michelle?
Well, when we look at what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, certainly, the new normal is something that everybody's adjusting to. Containerized trade has developed land bridges to compensate for the partial closure. When it comes to oil shipments, they're for crude, at about a quarter of levels. There's a southern corridor through Omani waters that is being used covertly with US military support. But certainly the threat of the Houthis with their blockade on Saudi ports, the attacking of tankers and grain carriers in the Black Sea, shipping has enormous challenges at the moment when it comes to maritime security, and that's really evident in if you have the appetite and the risk to have your vessel chartered to pick up a cargo in the Middle East Gulf. Very large crude carriers are earning $550,000 a day. So
Right.
this is a time of massive challenges and opportunities and extreme volatility and risk for commercial shipping that I've not seen in my 25 years of covering the sector.
Yeah, the price of that volatility is just extraordinary. What then has changed most dramatically, aside from the cost, which you outlined for us, in the ways ships are moving? Are we seeing longer voyages, different ports, different transshipment patterns? Has the war in Iran, I guess, been a generational turning point for global shipping, where resilience and having alternative routes now matter almost as much as taking the shortest route?
Yeah, well, shipping is extraordinarily resilient. And remember, during COVID, when everything shut down, shipping kept on going. And, the same thing happens amid all this enormous risk. But I would say what a lot of ships are having to do now, especially around the Middle East Gulf, the Red Sea, is that they will switch off their vessel tracking transponders for safety and security reasons. And so now it's a lot harder to track vessels, and you almost have to see in the dark and find ways. And here at Windward, we use multi-source intelligence to compensate for the lack of visibility that we've got in the maritime trade. But really, the volatility is off the scale. New routes are being redrawn all the time. And when I mentioned earlier, we've got the Strait of Hormuz closed, Red Sea and the Strait of Bab el-Mandab imperiled. There's also Somali piracy. There's been a resurgence in that simply because a lot of the forces that were involved in protecting those lanes are now diverted to the Middle East Gulf. So it really is quite challenging. And a lot of seafarers have lost their lives. They don't have a dog in the fight. They're just there getting trade from point A to point B. And, at least I think we're looking at easily 20 plus deaths in the Strait of Hormuz alone.
Incredible. Michelle, brilliant to talk to you and to pick your brain on this one, talking about the financial cost and also the cost to lives as well. I hope you'll come back when we've got more questions on the matter. It's been great to talk.
Thank you very much.
So, time for you to set our course in the comments. Do you think this is a viable route? Can Russia cash in and win what shapes as a multi-billion-dollar fight? Let us know. And, of course, like and subscribe to help us make more content like this. Bye for now.